My question to you is, do you think this is modern history's most iconic trial on police brutality? And if so, why?
Yeah, absolutely. Without a doubt, it is. And this is going to be a study, case point in study about police actions in the future, about how people who are being pursued should be pursued, about the use of force, which, by the way, is a point of discussion in every single state right now at law enforcement agencies around the country. And so basically, it's going to be this whole point of use of force. When is too much force too much? When is force not to be used, et cetera, et cetera. That's all playing out in this trial, and you're seeing it even as we speak right now with all kinds of medical experts being called in, police experts who are specialists in this and give the training to officers on when to use force, when not to use force, et cetera, et cetera. So the most important thing is it's going to be a case that is going to be studied by future police forces as a lesson for those police forces as to how they must pursue someone and how they must bring someone to justice without doing them bodily harm.
Right. Today, witness testimonies continued, and they continue to bring more and more people to talk about what happened that day. What are some of your key takeaways? And before you answer that, what are you feeling about the fact that the defense is trying to show a different motive behind, how George Floyd died? They're saying that it could be through drugs or an overdose. I'd like your comments on both of those things.
Yeah, I mean, that's what they're going to do. Obviously, they want to try and prove their point. You have a prosecution and you have a defense in any court case. And obviously, the prosecution is going to go by the evidence that they have, that they see, and they will want to prosecute a particular case in a particular fashion with a particular set of witnesses and a particular set of evidence that they have collected. On the other hand, in any defense argument, the defense will look to show that so and such thing happened, such and such thing was necessary. And so the outcome ultimately wasn't that of the officers in this case, is what the defense is going to try to show. And I fully expect them to try and bring in some kind of medical reason or hallucinatory object or something of that sort that affected Floyd, rather than the fact that the officer was kneeling on his neck and he couldn't breathe from that pressure that was put on his neck. So, it's pretty much what would happen in any defense case, where you're going to see a different argument altogether from that of the prosecution.
Right, and today we also saw there was a struggle to get the testimony of Morris Hall, who was the friend of George Floyd. He was there that day in the car. Why do you think his testimony is so important for the defense, and why do you think the prosecution doesn't want them to talk about that?
I think, of course, the prosecution will do everything it can to say this is not a material witness. It didn't involve so-and-so. It didn't involve someone like this, and the defense is going to argue otherwise. It's also a case of witnesses being named in advance. The judge knows he has a schedule that he follows, and he knows who the witnesses potentially will be coming in to testify before the court in a case. And so bringing in a witness unexpectedly, which may be the case over here, I'm not sure, but it could be the case, then throws the whole trial off balance. Because a judge decides that he will allocate so many days, so much of time to a particular case, and they hope to bring it to closure within that certain time frame. If surprise witnesses are sprung in, there usually is a discussion between the prosecution and defense before the judge, where the judge makes a decision that, okay, you bring in this witness or you don't. But in this case, I think that they've delayed a decision on what's going to happen to this latest witness.
What should the South Asian community take from this right now?
That this can affect them too. This can affect anybody. This kind of a situation can affect any person of color in the country. And therefore, this is a case that needs to be watched very carefully by the South Asian American community. As a matter of fact, I myself have been invited on one of the boards here in the state of New Jersey, one of the law enforcement boards here, to be a community outreach person where they're going to talk about use of force among police forces. So we're going to have a series of meetings on that. And it will definitely involve all communities, white, African American, Latino, Asian, Indian Americans, et cetera, et cetera. And this discussion is going to be ongoing, and that's why it is extremely important for everyone to be following the proceedings very carefully. Don't think for 1 minute that this is affecting one particular group and one particular person, and it's going to go away. It's not. I think I've indicated on your program before, I have seen a lot of injustices perpetrated upon our own community over the years, and I've covered our community, as you know, for more than 42 years already in this country. I have seen what has happened to them in the past, and I've seen where we are today compared to where we were before. And the young Indians out there, young South Asians out there who are growing up in this country are very fortunate to be living the lives they are living right now, not having realized the sacrifices and the absolute threat that existed for their parents when they came here in the 70s, for instance, or the 60s and 70s and 80s. So this case is going to affect everyone. Yeah. And it will also affect the mainstream white community as well, because there can be a lot of people who, for instance, are not privileged, are not financially that well off, and a police officer interacting with someone like that might treat them differently than he or she would treat someone who appears to be more privileged. So it affects everybody of every color.
Right. Let's just hope that justice is served over here. What a trial that we're following. Let's move on now. I have a couple of questions in regards to what's happening politically, especially with the Biden administration. Let's take a look at this $2 trillion infrastructure budget that President Biden has introduced. He has said that this will rebuild infrastructure in the country and reshape the economy. I would love for you to give a comment on that. And also, how has our economy been so far?
The economy, apparently, from all the figures we are seeing and what I'm watching as you are watching and what everybody else is watching, including the so-called economic experts out there, it seems to be booming. The stock market is doing very well. Banks are another issue. There was a big hit taken by Credit Suisse recently when one of the big companies, basically folded. And Credit Suisse had to take a $4.7 billion, I believe, hit. So that's a huge loss in the economy. The economy has been doing well, other than abrasive measures such as those, or an aberration such as that has occurred. The economy seems to be doing well. The economy seems to be getting fuel now too, the U.S. economy in particular. A lot of people and economists seem to be losing sight of the fact that is precisely because of the $1.9 trillion COVID relief package that was passed by the House of Representatives and the Senate, and the one that was initiated by President Biden, that is leading to this fueling of a spur in the economy. A lot of people lost sight of that fact. The point is that money is now out there in the economy. It's helping a lot of the states. It's helping a lot of individuals who did not have money to lay out there, to go to restaurants, to buy things, to buy essentials, to buy just regular clothes and things like that. And that money is helping spur the economy, which in turn is leading to the demand for more jobs, which in turn is leading to the demand for more employees, et cetera, et cetera. So it's helping. I give a lot of credit to that $1.9 million COVID stimulus package. As to the infrastructure plan, it's a very similar idea. The President Biden has offered it. Of course, there's going to be some corporate pushback because they're talking about raising the corporate tax. I imagine there'll be some talk about capital gains taxes as well being increased to fund this in the long term. But if you look all around America, the nation's infrastructure is completely in ruin, basically in ruin, is to put it very simply and bluntly. And therefore, this infrastructure package is needed extremely. It will create more jobs. It will create more economic livelihoods because there'll be more people employed. And it will lead to an improvement in business overall, because now once you have transportation moving fast, once you have technology upgraded, once you have bridges and tunnels and all the rest being rebuilt and being built brand new, you're going to see commerce flow. And the idea is not to let any other nation take over the United States, because that's a very real danger the U.S. today faces. With some fledgling countries that are now beginning their development, they have brand new infrastructure in place because they're building from scratch.
Right.
Okay, look for instance at India. Look at China as an example. Look at some of these Far East Asian countries. They have put into place brand new infrastructure because they never had one in the first place. So they're going to be effectively ahead of the U.S. The U.S. has aging infrastructure. We were ahead of the rest of the world back in the late 19th century and the early 20th century. Okay, but all that has fallen apart, and we now have to rebuild, and that's what he's doing.
Right. Let me ask you a question on that. You're looking at the $2 trillion budget that he has introduced. When we looked at the stimulus package, which was $1.9 trillion, we saw no GOP support for this. Do you think the same thing will happen with this $2 trillion budget for infrastructure?
100%, there will be no GOP support because they're going to want to know where the money's coming from, how it's going to be funded, and they'll put up the same argument that future generations of Americans are going to have to foot the bill, which to an extent is true. But the idea of making these investments now, when interest rates are low, when it is affordable to take on some sort of debt, is exactly that, to invest now when things are low so that we'll generate more economic activity and more finances to be able to repay that debt quickly and at lower interest rates. So I think but he will meet resistance from the Republicans. Joe Manchin, Senator Joe Manchin, also who is a Democrat, but a conservative Democrat, initially indicated that he's going to sit on the fence on this one. But now he says he's going to ask for certain changes. So for instance, I think one of the examples he's given is the corporate tax. They're mooting it to be somewhere around 28% to 32% or something. And he might want it to come down to 25% before agreeing to sign the bill and have it discussed in the Senate. So there will be a lot of back and forth on this bill because it is it's a huge expense, but at the same time, it's a savior for America.
That's true. I have two more questions left here for you. Another thing that's making news all across again is the concerning issue of the U.S.-Mexico border. I'd like to know how you're observing it right now, and what do you feel for these children that are basically kind of trapped there?
Yeah, the children are trapped, and they're finding out that more and more of them have been brought into the U.S. and left out there at the border by smugglers. This is something that, by the way, the former President Donald Trump had warned about, and he had said that it doesn't look as simple as it seems, because a lot of these smugglers are bringing people in. They're being paid to do that, bring them in and dump them at the border. No fault of the children, obviously, no fault of the families. Many of the families are apparently, from what we see in some of the evidences out there, falling for some of this and are not able to, foresee what's going to happen to their kids when they reach the border. For the children themselves, the plight is enormous for the U.S. It's a huge challenge. It's not something that any administration would want. I can assure you of that. Biden has already gone out there and spoken very vociferously and told people, don't come to the border thinking you're going to get free sanction and free sanctuary or not. And many, in fact, have been deported. Many people have been sent back. Children is another issue that's going to have to be looked at. They're going to have to figure out how they can release them into the custody of human services, which are the people who should look after these kids and are equipped to do so. But the numbers are simply overwhelming right now. Yeah. I frankly wouldn't want to be in the shoes of Customs and Border Protection right now, or at that Border Patrol station where these kids are right now. It's a difficult situation.
It truly is very difficult, and I don't know what the solution is. Let's hope the government comes up with something. My final question to you actually deals with foreign policy. Today, the big news is that there are talks, nuclear talks with Iran going on between the U.S. and Iran. My question to you is, how are you looking at it, and could you give us more insight into it?
Yeah, very important subject that's come up, and a very, very important matter for world security, actually. These talks are taking place in Vienna, Austria, which is the home of the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency. And it involves the European allies of the United States. And they want Iran essentially now, basically the United States wants to get back into the deal, the nuclear deal with Iran, along with the European allies. And the problem now is to gain and regain the trust of Tehran. And that's where there's going to be the bottleneck. That's where there's going to be basically a standoff. Because in the case of the Trump administration, they unilaterally pulled out of the agreement and decided they wanted nothing more, and it slapped on many more stringent sanctions against Iran. The discussions will not take place face to face, apparently. They will be happening through the third party intermediaries, because at this point, the United States and Iran are at a Cold War with each other. Now, Iran is insisting that the U.S. remove all sanctions before they're willing to even talk to anybody from the U.S. side face to face. The United States says no deal. You sign on and give assurances and open up your nuclear reactors and your potential reactors and all the rest of it to inspections, to regular inspections, before we decide what we do with sanctions. So this standoff, I imagine, is going to continue now for a while, because with the Trump administration's pulling out unilaterally, albeit with sanctions being slapped on even more forcefully than before, Iran still had free rein, because, once they pulled out, the U.S. pulled out, Iran said, well, okay, we'll go our own way, if that's what the U.S. is. In all of this, the key is now to rebuild trust.
Right.
Does Iran trust the United States anymore? And vice versa, does Washington trust Tehran? Because there never has been a complete trust since the Iranian Revolution back in the 70s. And so we'll have to wait and see. Also factoring into this will be relations with a lot of other countries in the region, namely Israel, how Israel feels about this, the whole thing of Iran coming back into the deal, and the United States getting back into the deal, and how that will affect relations with Israel. And then alongside all of this, the latest news occurring this week also has been an upheaval in the Jordanian royal family. So we got a lot of issues in that part of the world. Even with this Iran thing happening right now, the talks happening, some glimmer of hope something might come through there. You got the Jordanian situation. Any instability in that kingdom is going to be a problem as well.
Do you think President Biden will handle these relationships a lot better than former President Trump?
Definitely, at least without abrasiveness, because Biden is much more of a diplomat. He's much more of a compromise individual. He can be extremely tough. I will assure you and your viewers, he can be extremely tough when he decides on policy, and the United States policy is exactly what it's supposed to be. He will stand tough. I've seen that during his work in the U.S. Senate, and during his negotiations overseas with leaders as vice president and as a leader in the Senate. He has a track record for that type of thing. But he's a very good negotiator. He is an excellent negotiator, and but he's not going to give it all away. If he gives you something, you're going to have to give something back, so the U.S. is satisfied.